Hello everybody and welcome to a video where we're going to talk about a lot of things. I've been meaning to do this video for a while, but basically we're going to talk about item creation and how to make sure that your characters in your game don't have crazy power creep and stuff like that. And it's going to be a fun little journey because this information isn't just useful for people who are playing tabletop games and, doing dungeon mastering and anything like that, but it's actually just useful information to have as a gamer, as a person who plays video games, because then you understand the thought process behind why certain items of yours that you like in games will get nerfed or characters will get nerfed and stuff like that, and how general game balance works. Now, I'm a person who is really interested in game design. I always have been, and my limited experience has taught me some really valuable lessons, so why not push that value onto you guys, so that way you guys are able to utilize this knowledge that I have learned. That's the way that we all get better. So I'm on Roll20. I'll show you a ton of really cool stuff, but I also have Photoshop open because we're going to go through the process of creating an item. I don't know what the end result was going to be. I have an idea for it, and I figured now is the time to make this video so you guys can see my thought process of how we do this. So first things first, we do give my players a lot of items. For instance, this is a new one that has been given to Cookie, which is our Wookiee. He's a hired gun. He's our tank. And it's kind of a crazy item. I'll get into it in a minute, but it's the first item I've created that has a set bonus. And before I dig into why this thing is so powerful, I should mention two things. One, our players have been playing for quite some time. They are getting to the point where they're about to finish off their first skill trees and get their signature abilities. Some people already have their signature abilities, so they're getting to the point where they have progressed the players into, or their characters into, a state of a lot of power that they have naturally from their talents and their signature abilities, which are stupidly overpowered but really cool. And I want to reflect that in the items that I give. And why is that? Well, I think it boils down to what kind of game you are running, whether it be a video game or a tabletop game like this. Game design-wise, you always have to consider what kind of game are you going to run. Because lately, I have been finding myself saying this sentence, which is, this game is becoming more like Diablo. Whatever game it is doing this thing, and it's kind of like Diablo. I found myself saying that with The Division, and most recently I found myself saying that with World of Warcraft, with Legion coming out. Because in The Division, they've basically created the Greater Rift system, where you have a huge, or a rift system, I should say, not the Greater Rift system, where you're going through a dungeon, and you go through the end of the dungeon, which is randomly generated, and you get your loot at the end, and then you restart it, and it's got pretty much infinite replayability. And then with WoW, they're making it so they have that Greater Rift system, so you can go out and play these dungeons. They call them Mythic Plus dungeons, where you get a Greater Rift stone, basically. You put it into your dungeon and you empower it, and the higher the key is that you're empowering, the more powerful everything's going to be. So it gets flat damage increase and stuff like that, but it also increases the rewards from it, which is really important. We'll talk about that. But then it also adds modifiers to it. So one of the ones that I remember seeing is you take you have a dot on you, the entire thing, the entire dungeon, you have a damage over time on you, so it puts stress on the healer. And then another one's whatever attack it is coming from an enemy, it's putting a debuff on the character that increases damage taken, so that you actually then have to reconsider how you run the dungeon entirely and run with two tanks. All this to say that games are starting to take these ideas from Diablo 3, even though it had a storied history. Let's be honest. When Diablo 3 first came out, it was pretty bad. Then Reaper of Souls came out, pretty much fixed everything and made it incredible. But why is it incredible? It's because they figured out that reward loop. They figured out that perfect reward loop where how much items do we give you in this item-based game to keep you rewarded versus how much do we hold back to keep the grind going. And they found that perfect balance, and games are starting to try to mimic that now, because it is a system that keeps players playing extensively for a very long period of time. So how do I run my Star Wars game with a reward loop that makes sense for this kind of game? Well, first off, I need to give out enough items frequently enough, but sporadically enough at the same time to keep it rewarding. If I'm just handing out like hundreds of magical items and all this really cool stuff, it's not going to seem really good anymore. No, instead you have to, you don't just hand people a ton of trash, you give them stuff that is good. Stuff that makes them want to use it. Stuff that is comparable to the other stuff they have, so they have to make hard choices of, oh, do I use this or do I use this? Ooh, that's a hard choice. And once you've figured out how to manage that and how to give that, you're not only going to have an excellent reward loop in your game, but you're going to keep players playing and interested because they are going to feel rewarded from it, right? So that's the game design bit. So how do I make sure that my players are feeling rewarded after they've played this huge amount of time, already getting their first signature ability, and still they at max have 3 items at the moment? Like that's the typical number, is about 3 items. Well, they're about to hit a new thing where they get basically like a boss fountain where they get a few more items. And that will empower all the players and everything. But with that, they know that that's coming, because we have established that when they finish a character's story, they get loot. Or when they get involved in a character's story, they get loot. So it encourages them to focus on the story of the characters and less on just like going off and finding Yoda's burial place because they can, right? So the story is more focused on the players, and I like that. I've done that with the items. And they know that they get the items at the end of those kind of loops. But this one I just threw in there at the start of a story, because the second piece will come in later towards the end. And I think that's a really cool way of doing it as well. That's just, something that you can learn from. I'll talk about that more later. But I wanted to talk about our player power before I go over this item. So, long story short, we have a lot of players that play with us, and in order to make the Star Wars combat fun in the Fantasy Flight rule set, we had to give a lot more HP to enemies, and because of that, it resulted in combat taking a little longer against something, as opposed to them being able to kill it within like a round of combat, which they could do with just a couple of them. Like a couple of the players could easily kill, before I like buffed them or anything, could easily kill an enemy on their own within like 2 to 3 rounds typically, because there was enough of them that when they went on their turns, they were able to just smoke an enemy before they could even act. So I had to like double and in some cases quadruple the HP on enemies to make sure that they lasted long enough. But at the same time, we felt like the players were glass cannons. They could do all that damage, but man, could they only take like 1 or 2 hits, and that wasn't fun. So what we decided to do was to give the characters a bit extra stats through items, and using items to buff up the characters. So giving them a bit extra HP, basically, which is their wound threshold, which means that they could take a few more hits, but that means I can throw more enemies at them at a time, and they won't just get one shot when the like minions of the boss get to go all at once, right? So it provides enough risk versus the reward of them actually being able to do their damage. So that's the reason why we did it. For example, Doc, he has a wound threshold of 21, which isn't super crazy, but when you look at our tank, like Doc is our lowest wound threshold. Let me point that out. When you look at our tank, he is at 40. So there are some enemies that will do some crazy damage, like 15 to 20 now, because they're getting into that range of fighting big game monsters. Like not just not just random dude on the edge of the empire, like core rulebook where he's just like a thug and he does 6 damage and he has 12 HP. Like, they'll smoke those guys now. Why? Because they've been playing long enough and their characters are experienced enough that they can do that, and it feels good for them to be able to raffle stomp those people. But when it boils down to them getting challenged now, they need to fight things like crazy force ghosts and cool creatures like this, which we will talk about in a minute of why I have this up. But, you know, being able to fight cool things like that, or crate dragons, and like getting into that version of the Star Wars enemy line. Like, crate dragons are obviously way far down the line for these players, but at the same time, you want to start kind of giving them stuff that allows them to do this kind of thing, and not just increasing their base stats by a ton. You don't want to do that, because that's no fun. So instead, I'm going to show you the full like Monty here of items I created at the beginning of our campaign compared to items I'm creating now. So with that in mind, let's look at Cookie. So he just got Belashar, which is a really sick one-handed axe. It is basically, the description is it's made on Kashyyyk, and it was probably made before the enslavement of the Wookiees during the reign of the Empire. So back in the Old Republic days, not the old Republic, but the Republic of recent times, before they got taken over by by Emperor Palpatine and all that. So this weapon was probably made then by super awesome weaponsmiths on Kashyyyk, and it is a Wookiee specific weapon. It's got that kind of cool vibe to it. You know, it's got the bark and everything, but it's got a axe blade, and I just went online and found art, like weapon art, and just used that. But basically, the axe does 16 damage. It does 15, but it has superior, which gives it an additional 1, and the superior trait also gives it an automatic advantage when he rolls. So he always has 1 advantage to use. It gives defensive 2, which means his melee defense is increased by 2, which adds 2 black dice when something tries to hit him. Then deflect 1, which means he can have an additional 1 defense to ranged attacks. Linked 1, I'll talk about that in a moment. And then Cortosis, which basically is like anti-lightsaber, because they're going to start getting into the realm of possibly fighting things with lightsabers. And I don't want their really cool items being sundered, which are like broken, which is something that lightsabers can do. So some of their stuff will have Cortosis on it, like this pretty much legendary weapon. But then I created this idea of doing set bonuses, which obviously I stole from other games, but I made a really unique set bonus here for this set that is meant to be like a tanking weapon pair, which is when you receive a critical wound, any ally within 80 feet is healed for half of the critical wound roll result. So basically, if I were to roll a critical wound on let's say on Cookie. So I'm not sure the critical wounds are working here, but we're about to find out. Let me pop open the roll critical. So it rolled let's go all the way down. It rolled a 95. That's a really high roll. Suffer 1 strain each time you perform an action at the brink. Like that's a really bad critical roll that he does not want, right? But they would heal for half of that, any of their allies. And that's really powerful, but it's not going to happen all that often, right? So I made sure that it is a very powerful effect if he has both of these pieces. So if he's using the sword and what is a shield, I'll show you the shield in a second. But it's not going to happen that often because I made sure his character is hard to hit. And if he does get hit, and in the off chance he gets crit, which is the worst case scenario for him, because, you know, ultimately getting crit to the point of 150, right, is how your character dies, and you don't want that. It can roll up to 100 on your first roll, and then plus, you know, whatever is after that, plus 10 per crit that you have. So, and there's some items that have vicious on it, which add to the crit rating. So it's very possible to suffer a really bad critical injury in one foul swoop. and that is his weakness. That is our tank's weakness. And in order to fix that and make it so he's not vulnerable in that sense anymore, I've given him this thing that if he does get crit and that worst scenario happens for him, where he not only gets hit, which is rare now, but he gets crit, he makes sure that he is still supporting the group. It's not something he actively does. It's a passive effect if he's wearing both of the items, but it is really powerful. And then I'm adding more HP because they're getting into that point where they're going to face these kind of things, which are going to do a lot of damage. And then a vigilance, so that basically increases a skill, which I think is really cool, and a resilience, which also increases a skill up to 1. And I think that's a fun way of providing, additional power on a weapon, is by doing that kind of stuff. No sell price, because there's probably not going to be many people that are able to buy it or even determine the price of it. And he'll probably have to do something later with it that doesn't involve selling if he ever gets rid of it. And then I have 2 hard points on there, but I made sure that I set up like a custom rule set where if they're going to modify these weapons, it's with specific modifications that will come later to empower this weapon. So he may have this for 8 months, 8 to 10 months. Because he will find additional stuff that makes his weapon even more powerful as he gains basic skill level, So that's a really cool item. It's really powerful. It's meant to be really powerful, and it's meant to feel overpowered to the player. Because, behind the scenes, I can tweak enemies and stuff to make sure that this is okay. The enemy levels are going to scale up, and I'm good at balancing that and making it still a challenge for the players. Not everybody is, but I found that it's something I'm good at. So while this feels really cool, it's that instant gratification that you're giving the player a really cool item where later they are going to need it, because enemies will then challenge the power level of this item. Likewise, the shield is a very similar effect where you have superior. It does 8 damage, but does stun damage, so he can basically shield bash people with it. It has defensive 1, whereas the other one had defensive 2, and deflect 2, where the other one had deflect 1. So basically, with this item set, he's gaining 3 defense and 3 deflect, which makes him harder to hit. But the other items I give him won't necessarily have that much on it, or any at all. And then linked, again, I'll talk about that in a second. He can knock people down, stun them with it, and then utilize the cortosis. And it has the same set bonus, because if he's using both of the items, that's how that'll work. So how does linked work? Well, linked is if you activate it, you can attack with the second thing that is linked to it. This is typically on guns or starship guns, and basically orbital bombardment kind of stuff, where it's got like an X-Wing. All 4 of its guns would be linked. It would be linked 4, and you would have to spend the advantage that you roll on your roll in order to activate the linked, which will attack again. Well, with this scenario, I didn't want to give him a dual wielding thing. I wanted to give it so he is being benefited from rolling well by being able to attack with a shield, which does stun damage, which affects strain instead of health threshold. But then he has to choose whether or not he uses that knockdown. So sure, he can use linked, but he may not roll enough advantage to do knockdown. And then there's an interesting choice that has to happen. Does he attack instead with his shield and not with his weapon, and hope to get the linked from that? Because the shield, if he attacks with the shield, is again going to automatically give him 1 advantage because of superior, which means he can activate knockdown, but he can't necessarily activate linked. So it's this cool little gameplay thing that unintentionally came out of it, where he'll have to choose which of the 2 items he's using, and if he gets a good roll, he can use both, it's a rewarding playstyle for the players. Now let's take a look at something that wasn't this was something that was created at the beginning of our game, which are these robes, which is basically 2 defense, 3 soak, yada yada yada, 2 force rating, 10 wound threshold, 1 intellect. That is super boring. That feels like Diablo 3 original levels of boring. And I learned from this. I learned that this is cool and kind of good, and this was meant to be just like a stat stick, right? So this was our way of buffing the players without just like giving them stupid stats just on their character sheet. Like they have to have an item equipped in order to get the stats. But I felt like this wasn't fun enough. So how do I challenge the players to use a new item, a different item that is, moving on from this kind of thing, and instead not necessarily gaining that one intellect. Like maybe you do give up that one intellect on the next piece that I give him, on the next chess piece, the robes, but he might get one extra force rating. He's currently at 3, so it's pretty balanced for him. But what if we gave him one other? Or what if we just made it a 4-set bonus? So he has a 2-set bonus and a 4-set bonus. So he's like forced to wear these items. So that way it's worth giving up that one intellect. And I think that's a really interesting design challenge for that kind of thing. And we're going to talk about that in a minute when we create this new item, which we have here, which I'm going to show you. But I really quickly want to, now that we've kind of like gone over the design of that, I want to real quickly go over the characters when I'm designing items too, because that's another thing you have to consider when creating an item for a character. Like in particular, Cookie, probably he's good with the axe and shield. He'll be good for a while with the 40 threshold, and when he gets his shield, he'll be up to 60, which is really good. That's kind of what we wanted. I discussed with him, this is really important. You have to do this. If you're playing a tabletop RPG, you need to ask your players, what do you want to do? I asked him, are you happy with tanking? Is that something that you want to continue doing? And he said, yeah, that's fun. I really like it. But right now I'm using a 2-handed weapon. It doesn't really feel right. So maybe I should go find a shield. And I'm like, perfect. I got the thing for you because I already have the weapon set in mind. So I've talked to him, figured out that that's what he was wanting to do. Likewise with Doc, we talked about it and we said, okay, you are currently playing was it a colonist? I gotta make sure before I move on. Yeah, he's playing a colonist, which is basically the healer from Edge of the Empire. Cool and everything, but he's not getting as much use out of his like class stuff because he recently discovered the Force, and so now he's using all this Force stuff, and that's cooler to him. So in a story sense later on, by the way, if your characters ever want to, like your players ever want to change what they're doing because it's not fun to them, let them. Otherwise, they're going to quit your game. Like that's just the result of that. So it's really smart to let your characters change. Well, in this case, we can come up with a narrative reason because he's already learned that he can use the Force. So why not? Because we're in the Force Awakens. The Force is awakening, and some people are starting to be able to gather those powers. So why not be able to narratively explain why he is no longer a colonist and switches to one of the Force using classes in Force and Destiny by ending what is effectively our episode 1 of our game. So like our first major chunked story, and then moving on to episode 2, but having a gap in there where maybe Doc goes off and trains. And that's what he does. He goes and tries to learn the Force, and then that's when his class switches over. We respec him and everything. But basically, at the end of the day, when we're creating items for him, we need to understand that he is going to change. He is not going to remain the same. So we got to create more Force-focused items. And we also have to create items that have a little bit of ambiguity to it, because that's the character that he is currently. It's fun for him, and it's fun for me as a storyteller to tell this stuff where it's very mysterious and he doesn't know about the Force yet. He doesn't know why that person got healed, and it's just kind of this really cool like storytelling thing. So I create items that do that as well, such as this staff that the party has. And this is just a fun little flavor item that they picked up. It's just a staff. This is a well-crafted ancient staff. The center grip glows with a blue light. There's obvious technological components to the staff. However, their purpose and power source is unknown. Upon further inspection, there are pieces missing. Their characters have no idea what the heck this thing is, other than it was cool, they found it, they kept it. We all, as players, know that it's a lightsaber. The characters do not know that. So he has the components for a lightsaber later on, and I planted that really early, but he just doesn't have it yet. So that's a cool way to add that like very mysterious item to his character that he will learn about later. And that's always fun to introduce, as from a game design perspective, introduce an item that will later become effective or will later be learned about. And they have to set off on a quest, and this is pretty cool, set off on a quest to then learn about that item. Because then you're creating content that is interesting for the characters, because it might be a mysterious thing that they don't actually know about. Like the players may not know that that's a lightsaber, and then they find out later on that it is. So there's like all these really cool things that you can do and learn and find out on these quests to discover these items and make these items known, so then they can use them, which also gives you an idea of what the characters want, because you can listen to the players speculate about what it is if they don't know. And then if they're like, oh, that would be really cool, maybe you haven't even come up with the idea of what the end like item is, and then they say it would be really cool if it did this, just like off the cuff, and you're like, that's a perfect idea, I'm going to steal that, but you don't tell them. That's also an option for creating these kind of like ambiguous items. But one thing when you're creating items for characters, you need to look at what they need, because Doc's HP, really low. Strain threshold, really low. Soak, pretty low compared to everybody else's. Like Venator, who recently got like a massive upgrade, is now up to 30. So how do you give him something that is cool to his character, yet still buffs those stats? Well, right now, because he is in this weird state of transition to a new class, I'm decided I'm not touching the strain and the wound threshold. Maybe the soak later on, but right now, wound and strained, I'm not touching. I'm leaving that back. He stays at a distance anyways. He's likely not to die to something like that. So I need to then create something, knowing that they're going to this planet that possibly has these artifacts on it and stuff like that. I need to create something that fits his character and is rewarding, but is not necessarily touching the stuff that I'll need to touch later. So we now need to look at like, okay, well, it probably should deal with force stuff, right? So that should be the item. And that's where I've come up with this item that we're going to create. So story-wise, they're going to be going to Dathomir. On my next story time, I will describe why and all this stuff. I still don't know if they're going to go there, but they have a potential to go there because they have pretty massive quests that all their leads point to Dathomir. So what is Dathomir? Let's look at it, because this is a cool way to create an item. We know that we want him to have a cool force item from this planet that has some pretty crazy magic on it. So Dathomir was a remote neutral planet and the home of the Night Sisters. We will take a look at that in a minute. The planet, lit red by its central star, had numerous continents that were overrun with vegetation, forests, and swamplands. The Night Sisters, also known as the Dathomir Witches, made their home in the swamps and wielded magics fueled by the Dathomir's own power. Dathomir was a home to the Night Brothers, the Zabraks, who were ruled by the Night Sisters. During the Clone Wars, Dathomir would come under attack multiple times, yada, yada, yada. The rest of that is cool lore, but not anything we need to know for creating an item, right? Or maybe it is. Maybe you create a relic of Mother Talzin or Darth Sidious, which would be cool, like they dropped it there. Whoops, like I dropped my lucky coin. Speaking of which, I'll show you the lucky coin in a minute. We do have a lucky coin in our game. So who are the Night Sisters? Night Sisters were a clan of and an order of magic wielding. This is different. This isn't force wind. This is magic wielding females who lived on Dathomir, planet bathed in dark energies. These dark side users were able to perform their arcane magics by tapping into the magical ichor that flowed from the depths of their planet. Right? What else is unique about Dathomir? Well, it is a planet that is known for the Rancor. So Rancor are on this planet. But, you know, what's really cool is the Terran Tatek, I don't know how to pronounce it, creatures that fed off the blood of force sensitives and inhabited caves and tombs strong with the dark side of the force. See the connection? Several guarded the entrance to a section of Naga Shadow's shadows, I don't know, tomb. But the thing is, these were also known as, or assumed to be, and this is stuff that's like, if you really wanted to dig into it, you could, but assumed to be the creation of people experimenting with rancors by using the Force, which is why they basically ate Force sensitives, which it would then be worth it to mention that they would probably be on Dathomir, right? That connection you can make from a game master perspective. There might be a few on Dathomir. So really powerful Force-eating thing. Well, what if we made an item based around that? And what my idea here is let's make let's not let them fight one of those because they're not ready yet. That thing would destroy them and murder them. So let's create an item that is based on those and is really intriguing and sets up an encounter with those later on because you know what it is. But instead, let's take the tooth of one, which is what I've done here. And basically, I went and found this tooth. Whoops. I went and found... let's see. Come on. No. Okay, here, just escape. So I found... Oh, hey, that's actually the text from this item that I was going to show you, which just reminded me. This is another item I added recently. Just a lucky coin, really simple item. Simple two-sided coin, custom made. But I added effects to it for our smuggler. So extra charming may now use natural charmer twice per session, which is a really cool ability in his talent tree. That means he can re-roll any charm or deception checks once. So this coin that he now has allows him to re-roll them twice. And then I gave him a second thing, luck. Once per session, he may re-roll any roll that he rolls. But it does not work on charm and deception. So he can't make 3 natural charmer checks. Instead, he can only do 2 and then 1 of anyone, which is really cool. And that's a cool little flavor item for him because he needed it because before he only had 2 items. So there you go. Anyways, back to this. So let's say the description is... We'll get to the description in a minute. We'll get to that in a minute. And we'll get to that. But overall, we have this tooth, which I found a picture of, and I took it, and now we want to make it into a necklace. So check this out. This is actually a really simple little thing. I want to make a new layer above that. This is just Photoshop stuff. Don't worry about this. I also want to make sure that I'm doing this in the right area. So I probably should make this, make this no, that's going to do it anyways. Fine. Make this a tiny bit tinier to actually fit in our ability card. By the way, I'll put a link to where you can get these cards that come Photoshop ready in the description below. A guy has made them and they're fantastic. So then we have this extra layer. Well, what we need is a rope or something to attach it around his neck, right? So we're going to just create kind of a rope that goes around. Right, just kind of all the way around, make it look rope-like. It's a basic line right now, but through the magic of stuff I messed with earlier to make sure that this was going to work, let's go paste layers style, and then we'll put that behind the tooth, right? And then suddenly that looks like a rope. Just a little clever little thing. So then I can take both of these, I can merge them together, and then add a shadow, just a basic shadow to give it some depth. And then we can... Did I actually grab both of them? I didn't. What did I mess up? Oh, I did something else. Okay. Let's try that again. Merge, blending options, drop shadow. You don't need to know how to do any of that, but boom. Now we have this cool little item icon that's there. And we can name this the... Terran... Oh, crap. I don't remember how to spell it. Terran... What was it? Let's look. It was the... Terran Tech. I don't know how to pronounce that or spell it. So we'll just copy it. No. I hate when ads do that. Oh, the terrors of live video recording. So we're just gonna... Boop. Tooth. Fractured. Maybe I should put that at the beginning. Tooth. Fang. Fang is a better word. Boom. So that's mysterious because they know now that it's from that creature, which they now know about. And then we can say a slightly aged tooth. Is that green? That's green. Here, we'll have to set the text to black. A slightly aged tooth with minor fractures and a mysterious green glow. Boom. Right? So that's the description. Pretty easy. And then we need effects for this. I haven't thought about this yet. So like effect 1. Maybe we have an effect 2. So what could he do that is really cool that increases his, force using stuff? There's plenty of things you could do. You can he's using force heal and force harm. So you can add like effects to that. I don't want to give him straight power. Like I don't want to give him another force rating. So maybe I just make it so that like, when he force heals, which is kind of his thing that he likes doing, it adds like +5, or because they have a lot of HP now. Or maybe if he spends light side points, it adds +5 to the heal. But if he spends dark side points to heal, it actually removes like -2 to the heal. So it might be like a really interesting little gameplay decision that he has to make there. Either way, I'm not going to show you the effects because I want it to be a mystery to him, because he'll probably watch this. So that's one of those things like, what could you do? You can add plenty of things here. You can make it so that way if he is attacked by, and I'm making this up off the top of my head, if he's attacked by an attack that takes strain away, he takes half strain damage. Oh, that's actually a really good idea, because if we go back to Roll20, for instance, and I want to verify this, which is why I'm going back here, and we go to his character sheet, and we look, yeah, his strain is pretty mediocre. Maybe we make it that if he takes force damage, he takes half damage, or quarter damage. Maybe things like that, where he's not necessarily needing that huge wound threshold now because he can mitigate that through other means. See, that's another way to do that, and that's a really cool way to build an item. Either way, I will probably end up tweeting this item out on our Twitter, maybe in like a week or two, when we've had enough time that he's probably acquired this by then. Or once he's acquired it, I will put out the final item so you guys can actually see what I did. And I will put a link to that in the description when it's there. So there you go. But overall, I wanted to keep the effects kind of a secret for now in case he watches this. And you guys might come up with a better idea. So there you go. I'll listen in for that. What do you guys think should be the effects? Maybe you can help design an item for our game. Kind of fun. Either way, I think that pretty much goes over the thought process. It goes over the game design aspects of it, like how and when do you give items? How often, how powerful do you... Typically, by the way, the rule of thumb is you want them to seem overpowered. You don't want them to be overpowered, you want them to seem overpowered. Because I can always adjust the rolls on an enemy to mean that he might be able to actually hit Cookie, despite giving him all this gear. But that also means that enemy will then easily hit everybody else. So it's kind of a trade-off. You gotta figure out what kind of items to give your characters and your players in order to do that. And in game design senses, this is exactly what balanced designers are doing. They're looking at all of this data that I presented to you, and they're basically saying, how could we make sure that the game is fun, rewarding, but balanced? So nobody's like, well, crap, like that character is clearly better than us because he has this one thing. You want everybody to have that one thing that is really overpowered, which is why our smuggler is really good at doing deception and charm checks, because he's the talker. He's going to do that. That's who his character is. That's why I've given him items to increase that. Whereas if I gave him suddenly like a ton of defensive stuff, it takes away from the identity of his class. So when you're designing these things, they also have to match the identity of who that is, which you've seen in me making this like little fang. it's going to be a force item. It's going to be something that increases the force powers of Doc, but at the same time is, basically just an item that isn't giving him any real raw power. Like, it's not just increasing his health. It's cool flavor for the adventure and for what he's doing. And that's another thing. You got to make sure you give these items and everything in the scenarios that they make sense at. But with all of that, we've probably drone on way too long, and we're going to probably talk about this more in the future and more stuff like this, because I find it fascinating, and I know other people do as well. Whether or not you guys do, we'll find out. Let me know if you found this kind of stuff cool to look at, and maybe I'll do more like creation stuff, like how I make maps and how I design encounters and stuff like that in the future. And it will give you some really cool insight into our game when it finally starts later this fall. But with that being said, we shall see you guys next time.